Thanks for joining us for another For Investors by Investors Long Beach podcast. As always, we're proud to be your all-education real estate resource without any kind of sales pitch. If you'd like to attend one of our meetings in person, we meet on the last Thursday of the month at the Grand in Long Beach, California. You can RSVP on forinvestorsbyinvestors.com/Long Beach. To find more investment resources such as blogs and podcasts and content from other FIBI groups, you can go to forinvestorsbyinvestors.com and search our entire library. Now, on to the podcast.
Well, welcome. First of all, I am not Matthew Owens. I am filling in for...
Much better looking than Matt Owens.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to say, do not adjust the color on your TV set. This is not how Matt normally looks. But who here, by the way, who's the first time ever going to a FIBI event? Please raise your hand. Okay, good. So we got a bunch of first timers. So you don't even know what a Matt Owens is. So let me start from the beginning. So basically, welcome to For Investors by Investors. For those of you who don't know, our whole premise of being a real estate investment club is that we are all about education. We're all about networking, and absolutely zero sales pitches are allowed. So any FIBI you go to is going to have that exact same philosophy. It's part of the community that we're building, and because of that, we tend to attract, we think, a higher quality audience, people that are actually doing deals that appreciate we're not shoving a boot camp or a CD set or something else, a 4-day camp happening next weekend down your throat. I generally run the club in Manhattan Beach with Matt Owens, who usually runs this club here in Long Beach. Matt's actually speaking in Seattle, I believe, for the weekend at a big conference. So he asked me to fill in and, offer me a microphone, and I'm like, sure, I'll do it, no problem. So what Matt said is, hey, look, why don't you pick a topic that's something that's current with what you're doing. And actually, I'm involved with both of these gentlemen here today in different capacities, all about developing in LA. And the idea is that, let's talk about what opportunities exist in the LA, the shortage in housing happening in Los Angeles. Who here knows that LA has a severe housing shortage? Right? Everyone knows that, right? LA's beautiful, and, we have all these people moving to Los Angeles, and of course, no one wants to build in their neighborhood. So that dynamic exists up and down the state. However, there are things that the state have done. There are things that some local communities have done that we think provide some opportunity, and that's mostly what we're going to talk about here tonight. So the way we run FIBI is that, clearly the $20 or $25 you paid at the door, is not how we're making money. It's not how we put on the clubs. We really rely on our sponsors, and we've got some sponsors for this club. I know Jeff's here with UDirect. Jeff, raise your hand right here. So Jeff is actually a self-directed IRA custodian. If you ever had any questions on using your IRA to invest in real estate, Jeff's the guy to talk to. I know Deke's back there with New Western Acquisitions, excuse me. These guys are a serious wholesale group that, if you're looking for properties here in Los Angeles, those guys have access to all kinds of properties all over Southern California. Actually, all over the country, right?
Well, we're just in Southern California now, but yeah, Texas, Atlanta, Florida, Philadelphia, Oklahoma.
So if you're looking for inventory, if you've got cash and you're looking for something to buy, go see those guys. Is there anyone from Trillion Capital here? So Trillion is one of the sponsors. They are a hard money lender. So if you're looking to borrow money from, for small single family or smaller multifamily properties, Trillion's going to talk about. Hart King is Hart here. They're a real estate law firm. They also sponsor this group. Concept 360 is a property management company. And then the Note Assistance Program, they also sponsor our club, and no one's here from them. So if you're looking to buy notes, if you have property you're looking to manage, if you're looking to borrow money, if you're looking to find property, if you have an IRA you want to self-direct, or if you did all of that at once and now you need an attorney to unravel it, there's flyers on the front table. Go ahead and grab those on your way out. We think because of who we are that we're connected to really good people through FIBI. So if you need a referral, you need a resource, just let us know. We'll point you in the right direction. So tonight, unlike a typical Long Beach group where there's a speaker doing a presentation, we are going to actually do a panel. And part of our panel is going to include, taking questions from the audience. So as we proceed, we're going to probably spend some time talking about just the current state of the California market. Then we're going to kind of move into some of the things that the state has done at a state level and some of the opportunities that provides to us as investors to capitalize on the housing shortage. And then we're going to talk about some of the things that local communities are doing, specifically the city of Los Angeles, to also help offset the lack of housing, i.e. provide us opportunities as investors to help provide that. So that'll be the flow of the evening. If you've got questions, raise your hand. We'll get to as many as we can. And the last thing I'll say before we let these guys introduce themselves is, we are not attorneys. We are not CPAs. So please don't take anything you hear up here as either legal or tax advice. We're fellow investors just like you, and we're giving you our opinions. If you've got specific situations and any big decisions that you do, we always recommend that you run it by your own attorneys, your own CPAs, and if you need referrals, let us know. We'll point you in the right direction. Okay, so with that, Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name is Andrew Ray. I actually grew up in Los Angeles, specifically Van Nuys, and I never thought I would get as kind of braided as God. It was really, even 10 years ago, I spent a lot of time working in Orange County, and my coworkers used to make fun of me about having lived in Los Angeles, and so I started off in real estate as just wanting to be an investor, and so looking for a fourplex or a twoplex or a duplex or a triplex, and I really had a hard time finding one. This was back in 2003, and then I started seeing somebody flip some condos. So I started off kind of flipping condos in Long Beach, specifically 90802, and I did quite a bit there, and I just thought it was like somewhat of a part-time thing. And then I got more into development, and I found out I was really passionate about making homes beautiful. And so in 2012, my wife and I, we started Verona, and since then we've done over 60 projects, and we've done everything. We started off with fixing and flipping houses, and then moving into doing a lot of smaller apartments, and we continue to do apartments, and we do a lot of subdivisions as well.
Thank you. Nate.
Hi everyone, I'm Nate Hava. I also did my first flip in Long Beach. It was a condo, so it's I just realized when I said that. And one thing that was funny that was kind of really neat coincidence, Andrew and I went to SC together, and even were part of the same student club back around 99, 2000 year. So that's it's kind of neat to reconvene and reconnect with Andrew. I'm a little bit newer to real estate than Andrew. I think my first flip in Long Beach was 2006, and I did mostly flips and a lot of buy and holds, and I was mostly thinking about it just as a passive investment, trying to produce cash flow. And I did that, bought a lot of rental properties locally and outside of the state. And more recently, in terms of investing, I've ventured out into a lot of you guys have probably heard of crowdfunding platforms, and there's a lot of different private placements that you can invest in as a small interest owner. I've invested in a lot of those. I've been very happy with the returns on most of those. And I started doing flips, and then I realized flipping homes was pretty challenging, very competitive. Everyone and their mom seemed to want to do it, including my mother. So I sort of gradually moved up to bigger projects, additions, single-family home construction, duplex in San Pedro. And so now we're doing small lot subdivisions, which we're going to talk more about tonight. So apartment building with one of my new projects currently is San Pedro. It's a 32-unit apartment building in downtown San Pedro. And I'm still learning a lot, and I feel like I'm still pretty junior as far as developers go. But I'm really honored to be here to try and share some knowledge that I've gained. I've come to a lot of FIBI events, mostly in Manhattan Beach, and really enjoyed and learned a lot from being in your shoes. So I feel it's really neat to be able to contribute back to this community.
Thank you guys for coming. Like I said, my name is David Coe. I also started fixing and flipping in Long Beach. Actually, that's not true. I just wanted to fit in with you guys. Actually, our first project was in Orange County, and that's where we started fixing and flipping, and then moved into note investing and I've done some syndicated investing. I've helped raise capital for other projects. And now I'm actually involved with Andrew here on a project in North Hollywood on the development side. That's my hobby, my daytime job. I'm a realtor in South Bay, mostly Redondo and Torrance. And we work with homeowners, but we also work with a lot of investors as part of our business. One thing that I think is interesting, and Nate, you talked about the fact that you've been coming to FIBI for a while. We actually met through FIBI. When I explain what is FIBI to people, and we're an investment group, everyone always asks me, well, what's your minimum to invest? And it's like, well, no, that's not what FIBI is. FIBI isn't a group of people where we're combining funds and making investments. FIBI's a community where people come together and meet other people and network and share ideas and share connections. And I actually met Nate through FIBI. We didn't meet through FIBI, but I think we kind of became friends through FIBI. Yep. I think every real estate deal I've ever done, somehow, some way, FIBI has been connected to it. Either I found a private money lender through FIBI, I found an opportunity through FIBI. So all that being said, when this is all said and done tonight, like if you just get up and split, you're kind of missing out on the biggest part of FIBI, which is meeting people. Just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, who here has money that's looking for a deal? Please raise your hand. Okay, who here has a deal that's looking for money? Okay, so there we go, right? There's 4 people looking for cash. I think we got about 8 people that have money looking for a deal. So make sure at the end of this thing, you talk to each other and see if there's a fit. And that's how FIBI works. That's it. That's the last bit of sales pitch you're going to get is just connecting with other people here in the community. So let's move on to tonight's subject. So the title for tonight is Opportunities to Invest in LA's Housing Shortage. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of set the stage for what we're facing as a community. And then we'll kind of talk about some of the barriers that are preventing housing. And then from there, we'll really kind of deep dive into some of the things that do exist that you might be able to explore as an investor. So first of all, from 1995 to 1990, the state of California was basically building 200,000 homes a year, right? So when California was expanding, that's how much growth was happening. In the last 10 years, we've averaged 80,000 new homes a year, and there was a really big study done a few years ago that basically predicted that we need to build about 180,000 homes a year to keep up with the increase in people and just the increase of the population in California. So we are woefully behind the trend that we need to be on. I thought this was interesting also. Between 1980 and 2010, the number of housing units in the typical U.S. metro grew by 54%. So in most of the country, between this 30-year boom that we've had as a society, most cities expanded by roughly 50%. In California, it was 30%, right? So we haven't even been, it's not like this is something that's happening around the United States. This is something that's unique to California, which is, of course, the state that's also getting the most amount of immigration into it from around the country. The majority of California renters, which there are more than 3,000 people 3,000 households in California that are renters, they pay more than 3 million households in California are paying more than 30% of their income on rent, and more than 1.5 million are paying more than 50% of their income towards rent. So basically 5 million people that are renters in California are spending an extremely large amount of their monthly income on their housing. And when California talks about the fact that we have a housing shortage, what they really want to say is we have an affordable housing shortage, right? They're really concerned about, finding housing for lower income people. So a lot of things that we're going to talk about tonight, some of it is specifically geared towards creating low income housing. Some of it is just about creating housing, with the theory being that people will move into the new product and then they'll leave behind older existing stock, which can become more affordable housing. And we'll kind of talk about that tonight as well. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, and clearly in Los Angeles, this is something that we have to deal with. In most communities, if you need to add more space, then you just continue to sprawl, right? Like you just continue to find what's the next farm that hasn't been developed, which is what California was doing a lot in the 1980s, especially Orange County. Orange County exploded in the 80s and the 90s. well, where do we sprawl to now? Like, what part of California isn't developed? You know, it's mostly a city all the way from Santa Barbara down to Chula Vista. There's not a lot of open space available. And even the space that is available, to be able to build out there, you might create affordable housing, but you create such a huge transportation cost because people have to drive into the city that their cost of living isn't any cheaper than if they just were to buy a more expensive housing. What you also do is you create all kinds of an environmental mess, right? Because you've got people spending all their time in cars, and it's bad for the environment. So what California is trying to figure out is how do we sensibly grow the amount of units that we have, but how do we do it in infill development, right? How do we continue to build in neighborhoods that currently exist so we're not making people have to move all the way out, you know, past San Bernardino to be able to find a house they can afford and still have a job. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is going to be based on some infill development. But of course, when you want to build in a neighborhood, what happens? What do local tenants do? What do local homeowners do?
Pushback.
All kinds of pushback. And there's some specific things that gives them the formal right to do it. So the first part of this thing is we're going to kind of talk about, like, what are some of the hurdles that you guys have when you're developing, you know, and you're trying to get a project through a local community. Like, what are some of the stumbling blocks that you have? You know, Andrew, why don't you talk about some of the things that you're dealing with right now?
I'll talk about a project that we did. It took me approximately a little more than 2 years to get a project approved that was in Cypress Park. It was next to this, people drive by the 5 and the 110, and they see like a Home Depot off the side of the freeway. Well, we're a few blocks from that. We're also a few blocks away from a brand new bridge that was built, a pedestrian path that goes to the LA River Walk Path. We're also, you know, a few blocks away from, you know, a new subway station as well. And the city has sometimes multiple zones to get approvals on. And the project took a long time, one, because it was a subdivision. We subdivided it. But I did something a little bit different. I used bonus density, which, you know, I used a state law that allows me to get more density on the site. And I provided something that the state really needs, an affordable housing unit. So one of the units probably rent for close to $3,500 to $3,200. They can rent it for a covenant that I signed. I think it's for $800 a month for one of the units. But the rest of them, I'm going to be selling. Okay, and so if I sell it, the city is going to make me only sell it for $190,000 when the average are probably about $850,000 to $900,000 each. Now, what's frustrating is that the hoops I had to jump through to get the project approved, I had to go through the city planning to subdivide it to get a tract map, and that took more than a year and a half. And then I also had to get a local jurisdiction, like a local overlay zone. It's called the Community Design Overlay Zone for Glassell Park and Cypress Park, which means that there's a bunch of guidelines you have to follow. But the problem is that the city staff had so many to process, they're overwhelmed, and they just were taking their time. So in addition to that, you know, you have neighborhood pushback. And I think I had like 12 people show up against me at the hearing. But one of the, you know, aces in my pocket was that I had an affordable housing unit. Even if it got appealed, it would be really hard to shut down that project. It was my way of saying, yeah, this neighborhood might be contentious, but I have something that's basically going to be very difficult, you know, for anybody to kind of overcome my project.
And that affordable housing unit, that was like and you mentioned bonus density, which we'll talk a lot about tonight. Explain how you were able to go from X number of units to Y number of units by using the affordable housing unit.
So by right, I was only allowed to have 7 units, okay? And what I was able to build was 10. So I gave away 1 to build 2 more. Now some people say, well, that extra 1, you know, like, is it really worth it to go through that? And the answer is yes. You know, when you're buying dirt for a certain amount of square foot and you're building for a certain amount of square foot, you're selling for a certain amount of square foot, to get that extra unit really helped the project significantly. But it also had a greater benefit. It provided something for the community, for somebody that could actually have a really low cost house. It also allowed us to be able to kind of leverage, you know, challenges against us with a project like that. So we ended up building 10. Well, what's interesting is the law changed while we were finalizing our approvals, And it changed actually to be more advantageous for me, but I couldn't stop the project and start all over again because how long it took with the incompetent planners at the city of Los Angeles, right? She's been reassigned since then to one planner, and I had to hire a law firm that had a relationship with her boss. So at the end of the day, it was challenging, but we overcame it, and we're currently building 10 single-family homes on that lot.
Nate, what about you? I mean, clearly dealing with the city and getting entitlement work done is problematic. What are some of the other hurdles that you can see that you've been having to come up against when developing?
Well, let's see. There's quite a few. I definitely share in the pain that Andrew is talking about when working with the city of LA. They're definitely one of the most difficult cities to work with. They're so big, and it's really hard to navigate where to go, who to talk to. There's a lot, there's oftentimes one department will say, well, you've got to go talk to them. You get, the other department will say, no, go back and talk to them, get an answer from them, get it in writing. You just get a lot of runaround with the LA city. Now, I'm actually just finished purchasing a project from another developer, which they went through a lot more pain than I've been through. I think I've been pretty lucky in terms of the NIMBYism, and NIMBY stands for not in my backyard, which is, sort of the pushback you get from neighbors. They went through a lot of pain and sort of like to get their project, which is a 9 single family homes, which is, the term is called a small lot subdivision, which allows you to build homes very close together. I mean, literally 5 inches or so in between each one is all you need. And they're considered single-family homes, and there's a lot of advantages to that. Home ownership, insurance is much cheaper, loans are much easier to get because it's a single-family home, not a condo. That's about kind of jumping ahead here on about that topic. So anyway, they went through lots of the neighbors pushed back and threatened to sue them. You have to go through a public hearing for anytime you're doing any kind of subdivision or a condo. You've got to go through a public hearing, and that can be a very risky event because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to come out and speak against your project. So a couple of neighbors hired a lawyer, and they threatened to appeal the hearing, which is what you don't want to happen. You don't want an appeal to happen. So this team went through just enormous. I received all these reports. They had to do all these reports to sort of satisfy. What
was their basis for the appeal? What were they?
They just didn't want their street to. Their street was mostly older historical buildings. Though some of them were apartment buildings. It wasn't just like a tree-lined single-family street. They were apartment buildings, historical. A lot of them looked fairly historical. And they just didn't want some, more advanced project coming in. And one of the points they really pointed to was the oak tree. There were several trees in this property, but the oak tree is a protected tree in most cities, I think in California, and definitely in LA City. So they really latched onto that one oak tree and made that a real nightmare for the developer. And so the developer had to go through all these steps to deal with this protected oak tree. They had to get a biologist to come and survey for any nesting birds, which I thought was kind of a silly thing in the middle of the city. They had to do these air quality, noise studies. All these studies were $10,000 for each study, and they did several of them. So that way, when they go into the hearing, they were bulletproof from appeal. And this neighbor, in this case, they actually paid the neighbor in cash, which kind of quieted them, which was pretty significant. It was $30,000. I mean, that's a cost, a high cost. So I've never had to deal with that kind of neighborhood pushback. Luckily, I did recently go in the city of Gardena. We got a 14-unit apartment building approved, but it wasn't easy. We were also using the density bonus. So the density bonus is something that's available statewide. Not all cities have specific rules about it. A lot of times they just point to the state, but most cities should honor and allow for you to increase density. The word density, what that means is number of units. So properties, R2, you should do 2 units of construction. And then there's R3, which depending on the city allows you to do higher density per square foot of land. So the density bonus allows you to increase the number of units, which as a developer, that's what you want. I mean, it really increases the value typically of a property by having more units. So in Gardenia's case, we went to the planning commission, and we really thought we had a slam dunk because we had the affordable unit. We were going to be the first affordable project in the city of Gardena, which, you know, we got a lot of positive kudos for from the city. And when it came time for the planning commission hearing, one lady got up, who I found out later was the wife of one of the commissioners who was voting, by the way, and she spoke against our project, saying it was going to cause a bunch of traffic. 14 units, I didn't think is, you know, I mean, in LA City, they're doing hundreds of units at a time on one parcel, so I thought it was a little bit ridiculous to be too concerned about traffic, but sure enough, we got a decline. So we had to go through another couple of months of you know, I met with the mayor, and we really, you know, tried to sell her on the project, and she actually really loved the project. And she started rallying the other city council members, and we eventually got it approved. So it was a success, but it's like that's the kind of thing you can deal with trying to develop. So it's tough sometimes.
But I think that's the point that we're dealing with in large cities in California, is that you have this pushback, and it's also inherent in the planning departments of, you know, making it difficult for you to build. Within the last 2 years, the city of Los Angeles has changed their own internal kind of like, not just politics, but almost like emotion and culture, to making it to where they're piecemealing the plans. So when they give you corrections, they continue to like just give you more and more corrections rather than doing it all at once and then come back and fix it and then you're done, which is the way it used to be 2 years ago, right? So we're dealing with these challenges with neighbors, things, and these are only 9-unit projects, 14-unit projects, 10-unit project. But the point is there's still opportunities. It makes it very challenging, some of these things you're dealing with. And so less and less people want to do the things that we do. There's less of us that want to go out there and take these risks and do these projects. And therefore, there's less inventory, and it keeps driving up the prices. And so it's just this cycle that we're going through. One of the things that's interesting, I think the same report you're referring to, California, like was today a pretty beautiful day, right? It was gorgeous outside. It felt great, right? People want to live here. So since 1950, California has been the #1 state in appreciation continuously every single year since today. So California continually beats out the entire nation as far as appreciation and property value against any other state that's out there. And it's because of these things. But combine that with not being able to build a lot and we have a bigger population boom, this is the crisis that we're...
Yeah, I think the population in the state right now is about 40 million. In the next 20 years, it's expected to increase another 10 million. So, we're going to be... it's going to be 50 million people, not just in Southern California, but up and down the state. But, Andrew, what about, I know while we're still talking about some of the issues, clearly the environment, because it's such a beautiful state, the state's very concerned about the environmental impact on development. In particular, CEQA was passed to help protect that. Talk about what CEQA is, and if you are going to build, what that means and how you have to maneuver through that.
So I got a little experience before I started doing these larger developments, working for a solar company and helping them get the clearances they need to build. It's kind of smaller solar farms, like 15-acre, 20-acre sites, all throughout the Central Valley. And I would go up and down to the different planning commissions, and the first thing I had to learn about was a thing called CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. And what they and there's different thresholds. One threshold is that there is not there's no significant impact that's here, and then there's other ones that there's some and you have to mitigate against them, and some you're going to have impacts, but you're offsetting it by doing some other things. And so the kiss of death is something called an environmental impact report, right? And so the project that he was referring to, the 9 units, okay, anybody that's a CEQA lawyer in California would have told you that you're not required to do any of those studies that he had to do. Like, none of them are required because it's below all the thresholds, and it's something called categorically exempt. So what happens is you have to file an environmental assessment report, and you present an environmental assessment report, and then you basically talk about what the project is, project description, what's happening, and then you have to write a report that talks about what are the impacts? How's this thing going to change? Like the traffic, what the counts are, what the air quality is. And so CEQA has been the number one tool that people have used to shut down projects. It's so easy to sue against CEQA projects. It's so incredibly easy because there's so many areas that you can interpret that they didn't study it enough. And you can tie people up for years and years and years. And then you can also, after that, you can continue to sue them under CEQA, under other categories. So lawyers have made a lot of money off of this. And some of the projects, it's good that they sued them because they're bad projects. But most of the projects are pretty good overall because they're trying to create housing, for all of us. So CEQA is the number one tool utilized to be able to attack a project. I don't know if you guys heard about in Los Angeles, this big giant project that's sitting empty in Hollywood Boulevard. It's like right up near Vine in Hollywood. It's called the CIM project. It was this huge. It used to be the spaghetti factory. If we all go down there and get the spaghetti factory. Well, they messed up, and when they were developing it, and a guy named Robert Silverstein and Doug Haynes utilized aspects of CEQA to basically shut that whole thing down, and it's been empty for like 3 years. I mean, can you imagine just like skyscraper, just completely ghost town, right? Same thing with the Target project. I mean, how many people could have been working? So I know that sounds like gloom, doom, but there are opportunities, and I hope I don't sound too negative. But the truth is if you can if you can bear the pain to get through it, there is gold at the end of the rainbow. There really is.
Nate, we were talking earlier about some of the other hurdles, like linkage fees, for example, is something that the state's doing to try to, use the money from development to create more development. Talk about what that is and what they should be aware about.
Yeah, so there's a couple costs that have kicked in. This is actually specifically the city of Los Angeles, which is where Andrew and I do a lot of our projects. And honestly, there's a lot of the opportunity in the city of LA because the city of LA, unlike many other jurisdictions, maybe Long Beach being an exception to this, don't like density at all. All they want is single-family homes around their entire city jurisdiction. Most of the South Bay is like that. And it's really hard to do anything that has more than a few units. So City of LA, they've upzoned a lot of properties, and they generally allow fairly high density in a lot of areas. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But in the last 2 years, and we were talking over our drink earlier, they've essentially doubled the cost of when I say the cost, not the construction cost, which is also rising right now, but double the fees that the city charges. Building permit fees, there's park fees, those are the two big ones. So they have this new thing that's being rolled out right now called the linkage fee. The linkage is between affordable housing and developers. And so they're saying that, well, we want the burden of providing affordable housing. We think the burden should fall on the developers. So every new project would start charging this linkage fee to, and it's significant. My project in San Pedro is a 32-unit apartment building. It's got a lot of square footage, and we're trying to rush through that thing as fast as we can so we can pull permits before this linkage fee kicks in. It actually gets phased in over 3 distinct periods over 6 months. I think the first one's June, then it's December, then it's the following June. It phases in thirds. And it's essentially, it depends on the area of the city you're in, but it's about $10 per square foot, the fee. My building in San Pedro is 40,000 square feet. It's, $4 or $5, could be $400,000 or $500,000 in fees, which could totally just kill the project. I mean,
wasn't that your profit?
Yeah, that's probably about my profit in the deal, yeah. So, I just don't get those kind of decisions. It seems increasing the cost of building housing doesn't seem like the answer to me, but that's the reality that we're kind of dealing with in the city of LA right now.
Okay, so we kind of thought we would start off the panel with some of the things the state's up against and some of the things that these guys are battling as far as obstacles. However, there have been some things the state has done, the city has done to promote the growth, and obviously, these guys are both doing active projects right now. They're overcoming all these hurdles. I think I want to start off with, and Dave, why don't you talk about this, especially with San Pedro, is the TOC, the transit-oriented. Like we talked about before, the state's very focused on trying to provide density near high transit types of areas, right? Because if you're gonna allow people to get denser, if you maybe eliminate the need for them to have a car, that might offset the impact on the environment. So talk about, because I know specifically your project was impacted by that, and just talk about what that means in general.
Yeah, sure. So if you think at a high level, we're building more and more metro stations in LA, which I think is great, and there also is a lot of busways that run. So the general idea, I think, makes a lot of sense, which is if you're near one of a high, a transit area that has a metro station or a bus or a combination of the two, then people don't need as many cars. And actually, if you look at a lot of other cities like Tokyo, London, Paris, a big portion of the city doesn't even have any cars. It's rare to have a car because there's so much public transportation. So now at the state level, they're trying to pass a statewide measure, which just got shot down. I think it was just too broad. Didn't have enough protections for maybe certain types of neighborhoods.
Just out of curiosity, because it was in the news, who here knows about the state bill that just, raise your hand if you've been following this at all. So basically what they were doing is they were trying to take this transit occupancy concept and implement it statewide.
Yeah. So I guess I can see the point. You don't necessarily want a high-rise next to a bunch of single-family homes. I mean, there's maybe needs to have some buffer zones or whatnot. So hopefully they'll rethink that and come back to us with something like that. But in the city of LA, there was a measure on the ballot about a year ago, Measure JJJ, which did pass, and which implements, what you call it, it requires that the city provide more density around metro stations. But they did it in a way where you have to also provide an affordable housing component at even a higher percentage than the density bonus, which we were just talking about earlier. The density bonus, which is SB 1818, is a statewide measure, and so all cities have to comply to providing this density bonus. So if you provide, it's something like 11% of your project. If it's affordable, then they give you a bunch of additional, I think it's 35% additional units. So that's a statewide measure, and most cities, have their own flavor of that, but for the most part, honor that. In the TOC, which stands for Transit-Oriented Communities, and allows for higher density. So in San Pedro, for example, our property is zoned like an R3 property, and it would allow 19 units by right. And with the Transit-Oriented Communities bill passing, we will be able to do 32 units. So it's a pretty significant number of increased units.
How many of those are low?
And those will be 3.
So you're 3
low-income restricted units.
So you got 13 extra units. 3 low income? You got to produce 10 extra regular units.
So it's quite a large increase to the total unit count. So there's some nuances to it. It depends on how close you are to the metro or the transit station. So if you're right next to a metro station, you're considered Tier 1, or is it Tier 4? And then you actually don't have to provide any parking if you don't want to, and you can have very high density increase. Now that goes Tier 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're 2 in San Pedro. So in our case, we can reduce parking quite a bit, and we can increase units. There's a few other concessions. There's something called floor area ratio, which means per the lot size, what percentage of that lot? That's what's the way to put it. So let's just take the example of 3-to-1. FAR is kind of a typical one for R3. That means you can build 3 times the square footage of the lot, which could be probably a 3 or 4 story building, right? So you can increase, it actually allows for a pretty substantial increase to FAR. And one of the big, I think, opportunities with TOC is a lot of commercial properties around LA City. And, most of the boulevards are zoned commercial along the boulevards. And, I always wondered, why do you see in LA all these single stories, commercial buildings? It's kind of ugly. And I go to places in other cities, in the world, and you've got these mixed-use buildings, apartments above, storefronts in the below, and that just feels cool to me. I like the way that it looks aesthetically, more interesting, and maybe more vibrant, more people walking around because more people living there. So, and that's what we're doing in San Pedro. It's a mixed-use restaurant, and down from the ground floor, 4 stories of apartments above that. And so at TOC, one of the biggest changes, I think, that maybe not everyone's tuned into is that for the C zone, it's typically 1.5 to 1 FAR, meaning that you kind of can do like a 2-story building, approximately. You can't go much more dense than that. The TOC allows you to increase that quite a lot, depending upon the tier you're in, but you can go 3 to 4 FAR, which is now you're talking a 4 or 5-story building. So that's a big change. And so I think there's an opportunity if you can find, because a lot of commercially zoned properties sell for a lot less than residential zoning typically, because of just historically this FAR constraint. So for the right eye, you might find a good opportunity, I think.
Do you guys think that there's still property out there where there are sellers that don't understand that some of these laws have changed and they don't understand the value of their property? I mean, Andrew, have you seen stuff like that?
I would say that more than 70% of the commercial brokers don't know. They pretend they do. They're really incorrect so much of the time. He's absolutely correct. The commercial zones are just like ripe for the picking. Like, they really are. It's a great investment opportunity because you have these areas that haven't been able to get developed because you can't really fit anything on them. Like, you can't put enough space. Why am I going to pay this much money to be able to limit how much I can build? Now, that's not the case. And what's kind of smart about this transportation-oriented communities, it literally also flies with what's happening and saying, hey, instead of him before maybe having to give away, I think you have to probably give 2 units away. And now he has to give 3. But, you start adding that up, hundreds and hundreds of projects. Now we have hundreds and hundreds of more additional affordable housing units, which is useful, which really helps out a lot. And so I have an example in Hollywood, and I literally scrapped all my plans, and I was in the middle of development on a 34 unit. It was going to be 36 units with the bonus density I can get. Now, my 36 units went to 45. So that's a big difference.
Just with the passing of that
law. With that passing of law. But it also went from 3 affordable housing units to 5, so now the city gets more affordable housing and goes, we're right next to transportation. I think it's up for debate. I think people still like their cars. We can reduce our parking significantly. I'm still looking for alternative solutions like car lifts, puzzle car lifts, things that I can fit more cars in my garage, things like that, because we're still not there with the metros. And it looks like it's getting there, but it's not quite there. But we also may have the self-driving cars, who knows? But this transportation-oriented communities is a very, very good opportunity. Like, I'll give you an example. On LoopNet 2.5 weeks ago, and Christine, I didn't put an offer on it, it was in Playa del Rey, right? Great neighborhood, okay? And it was only it was less than $2 million. And you can literally use bonus density, and you could have built like an 18-unit apartment complex. And you go up 45 feet. I mean, there's all these things you can do with like the bonus density that was available. I mean, you can even see the ocean, like from this property. But the broker had no clue. He had no clue. And so there was opportunities out there with this transportation-oriented community and also bonus density, by just buying some of these commercial strips that are available. But the reason why that commercial strip made sense is there's a little nuance in the code, and in SB 1818 it says if you have highway frontage, you can go 3 times what your property size is in basically total square footage. And so the devil's in the details, but if you're willing to put in the time to go into those details, you'll benefit from it.
Who's finding single-family homes are just like really easy to find to fix and flip right now? No one, right? Like it's complicated to find a deal. So I think it's part of what we're here to talk about tonight is, this is something where if you dive into the code, and we've talked a lot about legislation and government, and unfortunately that's kind of where this opportunity is, right? It's understanding the laws that are being passed and looking for the nuance in there, and of course applying that to an individual piece of property. But it's also sometimes about tracking where things are going. So, like, Nate, I'm curious, how do you follow this stuff? Like, how are you reading about these things, learning about these laws? Like, how do you study and become an expert in all these things, and then, so you have the information you need to apply to an investment?
It's a good question. So there's a few different ways. I certainly like to keep up with one of my favorite publications is Curbed LA. You guys, I think it's la.curbed.com. That was great. They keep you posted on changes to law, new developments, so you can kind of see what other people are doing. The way I've learned mostly is, I think, maybe two different avenues. One is I've hired some really good consultants early on. When I don't know about something in a certain area, I'll hire a consultant to help me guide me through it. Done that a lot. There's you'll be amazed at how many niche types of consultants there are out there. There's, my project in Silver Lake, there's a dry utility consultant, there's a wet utility consultant, there's a land use consultant. There's a bunch more. I can't think of them all, but there's like 10 different consultants involved. So it can be very specialized. But each time I work with one of these groups, I learn a lot and ask a lot of questions. So that's one good way. And another good way that doesn't cost as much is just go talk to the planning department or the city. You can, there's a lot of times you can learn a lot from them. And then there's also...
Isn't it funny how friendly they are when you're not trying to get something approved? Like, if you go to a city and ask a question, they'll usually spend a lot of time with you. If you have plans for them to sign, that's where things get crazy.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, so I've got a lot of information just from the desk. Even if it's LA City, there's a concierge desk, they call it. So you can go to 200 Figueroa and to the 4th floor, and you can get a ticket and talk to their concierge, who's more like a generalist who can kind of point you in the right direction and go take your ticket to another counter and ask more detailed questions. So that's a great way that doesn't cost much. Do that during your due diligence. I was going to say, there was one other thing. Well, I forgot. So those are my main two ways. Just learn from other experts and talk to the city.
Yeah, I also find the LA Business Journal is, again, for local type of stuff, that's another really good one. If you're trying to follow a news source that tends to be real estate focused, I think that they're pretty good. Andrew, we've talked a lot about some bigger projects. Let's kind of move on to talk about some smaller ones, right? Because I know that there is one law. By the way, who here knows what an ADU is? Accessory dwelling unit. Who here knows that there was a new law as of January passed about ADUs? So a couple of you know that. So basically in January, the state of California passed a law that is very similar to the law they just defeated on the density for transit occupancy community development, that allowed anyone that has space in their yard to build what's called an accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat. Basically it's like a mother-in-law's quarters that you can have. Some communities allowed those by code, but you couldn't use them as an actual residential space. You could have like a bonus room, you might have a sink, but you couldn't have like a kitchen, you couldn't have a bathroom, and you certainly couldn't rent it out legally. It wasn't considered a legal unit. So what the state did was they basically passed a law that says as long as you have, you've got setback and you've got enough space, you can build one of these units and you can use it as a rental. So, Andrew, I know you've been actively involved in this. Are you trying to do one in your property, aren't you? Is that what you...
we actually built it as a rec room and we converted it illegally, and then now we're permitting it legally. So, but a lot of people can convert now. That people have converted garages. Lots and lots of people converted garages over the years. Now they can go back and actually legally convert those to units under this law. This law is fantastic. I mean, I'm so excited about this California law because for me, what it does, it tells the policymakers that are in these different cities, whether they're super rich cities or they're, people who just have, cities that just love to have any kind of employment center, that they are required to allow the citizens of that city to build. They can build a house, or they can take part of their house at the back or on the side, or they can take part of their house and they can chop it up and make another house, right? And what this is allowing people to do is they can either create extra income for rental. It's also designed for extended families, right? Designed when people, families get older. And so it's, before, a lot of these cities were requiring you to have something called a 10-foot, basically a clear sky access to the front door of your unit. So most people, when you look at a house, you have a 5-foot side yard and a 5-foot side yard, or 6 foot, and that's it. And then most people don't have alleys, and you have your garage in the front. Well, now, the state law says as long as the fire department can get through, and you can build something back there, and you don't have to have this 10-foot clear to the sky. And so it's huge. And the permits have skyrocketed in the city of Los Angeles for building it back. But believe it or not, a lot of people aren't building these for spec, like to try to sell. They're building because they want them, and they've wanted them for years, and now they can actually do it. And what's really cool about the accessory dwelling unit, specifically in Los Angeles, I don't know about the other parts of California, is that it's exempt from things like this affordable housing linkage fee. Right? They're encouraging, they want it. And in fact, if you're within 100 feet, I think 500 feet or 100 feet, I apologize for not knowing, you don't even have to have a parking spot for that unit in the back, right? So, sometimes it's hard to find parking on your current house. They typically want you to have one parking space in front of your garage. It's a really great opportunity. I always tell people that wanted to do fix and flip and they've never done one, maybe just buy a single family home, fix that up, and then build another house in the back. And right now in the city of Los Angeles, you can build 1,200 square foot. They're going to change the law pretty soon. So I don't know if it's 2 months, 4 months, or 6 months, but they're going to change it to where it's only you're going to be limited to 50% of what the front structure is.
It's actually that's what it is right now. It's 50% of the existing structure up to 1,200 square feet.
That's state law.
State law.
But the city of LA's interpretation at this moment, they're kind of just letting people do 1,200 square feet regardless of the size. Right now, but that window's going to close at some point. And so
we had one of our clients actually bought a property in Hawthorne, and they were interested in adding an ADU. So I decided to go. It was actually in Hawthorne, but it was considered LA County. So it was the LA County office on that. So I went in, grabbed a number. There were 5 people there to talk to the planner. 4 of us were there to talk about accessory dwelling units somehow, some way. So this is something that people that have the land are actively out there, doing. I mean, from a construction cost standpoint, is it the same price as building new construction, or is it cheaper than having to build a new home because it's a smaller structure? Like when you're actually doing construction on it, what does that look like versus building a single family home?
Well, that's a tough question because there's a lot of considerations, but in general, in the city of LA, you can share all the utilities that are in the front house. You're going to probably have a sub panel for the electrical, but you can share most utilities that are there. But if you want to rent it out, it's probably better if you have separate utilities. And it's great because Department of Power lets you have a separate water meter with an accessory dwelling unit, lets you have a separate electrical meter, and you can have even separate trash service in the back. So if you bought a house and you built something in the back and you want to rent it out, you can help reduce your costs. As far as construction is concerned, it's going to be pretty standard construction. There isn't any limitations on building type that you have. The only thing that maybe if you're not near a bus stop, maybe you have to spend more money possibly on accommodating parking. But a lot of times they're letting you park right behind one of the spaces in the front of your garage, as long as you're not. And I think there's even a nuance about being able to be within a certain amount of feet of the front yard setback. So it's really generous what the state has done.
Yeah, I think one of the things you can do, if you have a big house, you don't have to build a separate unit, right? Because if you've got a big room in the back that you want to convert, add a bathroom, add a little kitchenette, as long as it has access directly to that unit where you don't have to go to the main house, you can consider it an accessory dwelling unit, and there you go. You now have a 2-unit in your building.
There is a smaller percentage if you do that. It's not 50%. I believe it's less. I think it's like 30% or something like that.
Right. Well, that's if you add the space on. But if you have the existing space, you don't even have to add space on. It's just only a certain percentage of the house that you can convert, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Now, Nate and I live in Redondo Beach, so there are no accessory dwelling units because we have other homes in our backyards. But from an ADU standpoint, I know you've been spending some time studying it. What do you see that's interesting about this that might be big for opportunity?
Well, a couple things came to mind. I'm definitely not an expert. I've been researching it. That's about it. So, but a couple of things that came to mind when I was researching it was, one, what a great opportunity to take an existing home, like if you're a home flipper, to just rehab the home and carve out maybe one of the bedrooms as an accessory dwelling unit, put a small kitchen in it, and I'm sure the value would be quite a lot higher because the owner now can have some rental income from that building. So that seems like a great opportunity for that anybody could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing that came to mind, I tried to research this, maybe you guys, maybe have more luck, but it seems like a great opportunity for prefab housing. Just think of a crane just dropping in a 1,200 square foot structure. There are some companies out there doing it. I saw it. And I think you just need a crane. You have to do the foundation still, some kind of foundation, but I don't know much about it. That seems like a good opportunity too for maybe save on construction costs.
Yeah, they're actually using containers too. There's a couple companies out there where all you're doing is running utilities, pouring the slab, and then literally you're getting prefabbed housing, shipping containers, things like that to come in there. So sometimes the cost of these things may not be terribly expensive compared to having to build new construction. So if you're here looking for ways and you've got a big backyard, here's one that's ready to go, tomorrow, and you can start exploring. Anything else on ADUs that you guys think is relevant?
I just wanted to also bring up something that you discussed earlier. David mentioned that this is a community at FIBI about helping each other out. Because everybody starts at some point and they get to a certain point. Like learning this information that Nate's been able to learn, and a lot of it, I've been able to learn. It's through hiring consultants, folks, but we're generous. If there's some referrals you need or things like that, the only thing I don't refer out is I don't refer subcontractors and general contractors in my trades. But consultants and knowledge and shooting emails over, like things like that, like, hey, where do I find out about this, and sending that information, and so some of these consultants I'm referring to, just ask us. We're more than happy to help you. And one of the things about this, about the accessory dwelling unit is there's a lot of banks that are out there that really, 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 really want to finance these kinds of projects because they're super low risk for them. And because they look at what the rental is, they look at your house, they look at the equity that's in your house. So U.S. Bank is one of them. Bank of the West is another one of them. I mean, there's a number of banks. It's so much easier to get construction financing for your personal residence, for accessory dwelling unit is, than just try to go out there and build a spec home. That's for sure.
We had especially in communities like Lawndale, Torrance, Long Beach is actually one of them. There's a lot of people that have a bootleg unit in the back already. So as you're looking for properties to flip, or you find looking for a property to rent, and you see one of those, other people may say, wow, that's a problem. They've got an illegal unit. You should see that as, oh my God, there's a free unit that all I've got to do is go and actually, I might have to spend a little bit of money on it to convert it to a legal unit, but now California law will allow you to do that. So as you're looking around and looking at things, that this is something that has only been around for, it's April, so less than 4 months now. This law has been intact. So if you don't know about it, read up on it. Actually, there's a great, if you go to the California Department of Housing, there's a really good, infographic PDF. It's about 8 pages long that talks about the law, that talks about how this law supersedes local law. You may find something, you may say, hey, this may work. You may go into a smaller local city and they may not understand everything about this law. So reading up about it, before you go to talk is something that we highly recommend.
Hey, one more thing that I remember reading about ADU is that it doesn't have to be an existing home where you're adding an ADU. You can actually construct a new single-family home and construct the ADU all at the same time, which apparently was not allowed before until this last law was passed this year.
Yeah, so if you're building new construction and you've got space, you might as well build too. You've got people there, you've got framers there, you can create additional square footage and additional rental income by having a second unit. Right, so let's talk about some other facets of how to potentially invest with this housing crisis. One of the ways that comes to mind to me is I know, working with both of you guys that, you are you're active developers, but you're not just using your own capital. You're both looking for capital, both from an equity source, both from debt to do these projects. Nate, why don't you talk a little bit first about the projects you do, how you're structuring your deals, and then how you're working with people to help raise the capital necessary to do the projects that you're doing.
Sure. So there's at least two different types of capital that you can bring into a deal, a development deal, or even a flip deal, is debt and equity. So you can get high leverage debt and lower amount of equity, or lower leverage debt and a higher amount of equity. So I've tried both, and it kind of depends on the deal, which one makes more sense. There's a lot of lenders shy away from new development, and it can be pretty tricky to find a traditional bank that's willing to finance land acquisition, especially. Construction is a little bit easier. A lot more banks do provide construction loans, but if your idea is to find a piece of land and entitle it to be a small subdivision, it's actually quite a lot harder to find good lenders. And if you need some referrals, feel free to reach out to me. I've got quite a Rolodex now that I know of, but a lot of them are more hard money types of rates, just FYI. So most of my deals, I will find the best lender that I can find under the best terms, and then raise the rest as equity. So I typically just look to friends and family, people that I've known through our community, FIBI, as well as friends and friends of friends. I read my newest deal in Silver Lake. I did partner with a private equity firm. That was a kind of an experiment. I wanted to see how that worked and what kind of strings came attached in that scenario. So there's definitely strings, but I think it's going to go pretty well. It's a firm that places equity into development projects. They were a developer before the owners retired and sort of just decided they're going to just place money into deals like mine. And that can be an interesting approach. I think you've got to have some track record to show before a firm like that is going to be willing to trust you with their money. So I think it's I had to sort of gradually grow from, my uncle and grandparents to friends of friends to this current project of a private equity firm. So time will tell how well that goes. They do have some pretty significant reporting requirements. I've noticed I've got to produce quarterly, financials and audited financial statements. So it's a bit intense from an administrative standpoint. But to really grow into doing larger and larger projects, it's important to start looking more for institutional level capital like that. I've also found a few brokers out there that help developers like us find equity and debt. Of course, they'll take a fee. Debt's usually maybe 1 point, and equity could be 3 to 5 points. Or if they're going to connect you with a private investor or it could be a pension fund or a private equity firm. So I'm happy to refer those referrals to you guys to the brokers. So that's kind of a few ways that I've gone about it. And I think my attorney that structures the documents that I use, he was a person I met at FIBI. He was a panelist. He's been, I think, a few times. Peter's been a panelist here, Peter Fisher. And so that's been, because there's a lot of documentation when you're creating a private placement for other investors to invest into. There's a lot of things to think through. A lot of terms of the operating agreement. There's you want to disclose all the risks, because there are a lot of risks, and if you don't disclose them, then you could be putting yourself in jeopardy of if things go south. All those contracts only make a difference if things don't go well. Right? If things go well, people only look at the documents, but it's good to have solid, contracts and operating agreements in place, because things can go badly. And luckily for me, they haven't yet.
Does everyone know what a private placement is, by any chance? Does anyone? Let me explain. So basically what Nate's talking about is that when you do bring a bunch of people together into a project and they're investing passively, Okay, passively means they have no control over the day-to-day actions. They're going to supply capital, and then someone else is going to do all the work. You're technically creating an equity. You're creating a stock, but it's an untraded stock, right? It's something where the general public can't look at the performance of the stock. It's a private stock that someone else is controlling. So to prevent developers from taking advantage of people that may not be sophisticated kind of investors, that may not be smart, they place like income thresholds that you have to have. So if you're going to invest in an opportunity like this, you have to have a certain amount of net wealth. Mostly what the SEC wants to know is that any money that you're investing into something like this, that you have the ability to lose it. Because these are high risk in the sense that there is no necessarily transparency. Even what Nate's talking about, the private equity people that he's dealing with want to see audited financials on a quarterly basis, which is, an extremely quick pace to have that.
I think it's an annual.
Is it annual? Okay, so it's just
a lot of quarterly.
Oh, you said, I was like, man, that's crazy. It's like, but that's all those strings in your back that they're pulling, right? So those kinds of opportunities exist if you are an experienced investor, if you've got a certain amount of high net wealth, which includes equity that you own in positions. This is a way to where you can get involved in some of these kinds of projects without having to take on the risk of being a developer. Now, Andrew, I know you prefer not to work with institutional kind of funds and more work with smaller private investors. Talk about how some of your deals are being structured, and also, and I'll ask you the same question. Talk about how you split the revenue between yourself and the investors that come into your deals.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I'm really curious to see how things go with the private equity group, because one of the things. When I was working at the solar company, I used to have a really smart boss. His name was Bill, named Bill Pham, and he was a structuring lawyer at Skadden Arps, and he did everything he could to try to stay away from really onerous contracts. And even though he was the person who wrote it, he'd like to keep these contracts down to literally just pages, a few pages, right? And so one of the things that I found with some of the larger groups that have wanted to work with me and to provide capital, it just didn't seem that they really cared about what was really going on with what we were doing. And at the end of the day, I'm a big person about heart, and I'm a big person about making things like homes beautiful. So for me, I was like, okay, I get it. And so maybe I don't have to do as many deals, but I do deals with the right people that. So of course, just like you start off with friends and family, and then and you just inch your way, and if people kind of ignore you in the beginning, and you just keep them abreast of what you're doing. All of a sudden, I like what you did, and say, let me do something with you. And you just always, just be forthright, even if you screw up. Just kind of, own it. So the way that I typically split a project, and this is what people typically, that's what I love about this, is where you get the grit. You get the real details in a place like this. So you have whatever the debt is, right? Whatever the lender will give you to purchase that property, right? And then you also have what the construction is going to cost you. And the lender will say, okay, I'll give you this much to do the construction. Okay, and so you have to come in with a certain amount to balance the gap. But you also have to pay for all of your carrying costs, and you have to pay for all the development fees, permits, etc. Right? You also have to make sure you have contingencies in there, and you also have to make sure that you have contingencies for how long it's going to take you. And then that's how you figure out how much equity is there, right? And then now you go out and say, okay, this is how much equity I need. So typically, when I was doing fix and flips, I would literally raise money, and us as the sponsor, we would get 70%, and the investor would get 30%. Right? Well, people are like, that's crazy. I wouldn't invest in a deal like that. Well, if you're making 30, 40% annualized returns, you'll do a deal with me, like on that. But now there are a lot more risk, there are longer projects, and it's typically a 50-50 split, right? And then what's going to also happen is groups like ours, it's not just us working, we have a big staff that works at our company that does the accounting, that does all of the running around, and we're very construction focused. And so at any given time, we've got at least 7 people that are doing construction-related activities that work just for us, right? So there's a big overhead that we have to deliver these projects. So there's typically a development fee. Now, some people have really high development fees. Some people have lower development fees. It's based on your opinion, right, on what it is. And so I don't do a development fee based on a gross number. A lot of people do that based on a gross project cost number, right? That's like a percentage. That's a typical structure. Us, we'll do based on what we feel like it's going to cost us administratively, internally. Like, what's the burden to our company? We have to hire somebody else, and that's how much we, charge, for that period of the project per month. And that's how we structure it. And then we split the profits. When it's all said and done, the investors, after the debt's paid back, the investor gets their money. And then after the investor gets the money, it's split 50-50. Now, some people have a preferred return, and some projects have a preferred return, right? So before there's a split, the investor gets a preferred return. And there's anywhere 6, 8, 10%, just depends on what the project is.
And then
it's split 50.
And then split 50 from that. Nate, what about you? Is that about the same that you how you structure your funds?
Yes, Andrew pretty much explained most of it. Very similar structure to Andrew. I typically do 60-40, where I retain myself and my partner, the principals, retain 40, and investors retain 60. But that's because I have a much leaner team. I'm mostly virtual. I hire freelancers to do most of the work or consultants. So I probably don't have as much overhead as Andrew does. So in my current experience level too, I feel like I need to provide a higher level of return for the investors. So that's kind of why I made the decision. I think when I get to your level of 60 projects completed, I'll probably do it 50-50 too. But so that's just my thinking. I feel like people are taking a game. They're putting their hard-earned dollars with me. I'm going to make sure they get a high return. Typically, the investors that are investing in an equity position are expecting between 25 to 30% annualized returns for my projects. And I think otherwise we plan it pretty well on things in terms of the whole structure.
And every project is
waterfall.
Yeah, and every project is different. Like at some point, we're going to evolve to doing a lot more syndication of just apartments. When we find really good apartment sites and we kind of reposition them, we'll have a different equity split based on that because there's no need for us to have that because we're not creating that much value in that asset to deserve that, because it's going to be hard to give a good yield to an investor. So every asset, every opportunity has a different, and every single investor, they have different temperatures on how. But like one thing I can tell you is, don't be fooled by the splits. Look at what the net to you is, and look at what the person's cost structure is, and their historic cost structure, and how they're delivering things. Because one group may say, hey, I have we take 30, you take 70, but if they're hiring a general contractor that's 40% higher than my costs, and that may not be the best return for you, right? Or if you're comparing apples to apples, you have to really look at what the net numbers are. It's not percentages, it's risk, reward, and also what you're comfortable with.
We started talking about small lots a little bit, but we haven't really kind of dove into that one. By the way, anyone have any questions here? This has been an extremely quiet audience. Anyone have questions on any stuff that we've talked about? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question early on, Andrew. You did mention something about the 10 unit near the 5 and the 110, where it might be worth $850, but you need to sell it for $190. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, so the question was asking about the affordable unit and the difference in cost there. So let's kind of talk about SLOs now, but talk about that one and what you meant on that particular unit.
Okay.
Before you do that, can I ask a question? It relates to the previous conversation.
Sure, go ahead.
How much are you paying when people find deals for you, finder's fees or broker fees, or how do you value that, and what do you typically pay those people?
All right, so the question was, what kind of fees are these guys paying for people that are bringing them projects? Right. Go first.
Sure. It varies a lot. It depends on, I think, how sweet the deal is, or the price that the person's able to lock in contract in the property. Or sometimes it could just be a referral, like, hey, Joe, meet John, and they want to sell. So, I mean, at a bare minimum, I would always offer at least a 2%, kind of 2.5% return, which is what a typical agent might receive for that. But if it's a really great deal, I'm trying to think, we paid. There was one deal where we paid $80,000 for a property to the finder.
Ever a percent of the profit?
Most people won't wait around.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be open to that. I think there is cases where there's been a few cases where someone who I pay a referral fee for finding other equity investors, I'll pay them on the back end as part of the profits. Yeah. So, but I mean, I'm open to any scenario like that. I think most developers would be. Just if you have a good one on the line, and you bring in and say, "Here's what I got,"
most people
offer your fee.
Most people would love to pay you more later than pay you less now, especially when you can pay from the success of the project. So I think most people would take that. I think it's more that most people that are bringing projects want to get paid right now. They want to get paid right now. His question here asking about the low income unit.
Yeah, I'll answer the question. So when Nate was talking about this SB 1818, you can get up to a 35% bonus density. It's in the whole state of California. In order to get that bonus density, you have to provide typically 11% of affordability of the project. And so whether that's 1 unit or 10 units that are for affordable, depending on the size of your project, that unit is required to have a covenant that you cannot sell it. In the city of Los Angeles, that covenant is for 50 years. Okay? So on the project in Cypress Park, it's called IDEL 10. That project, I got a unique covenant that I didn't know existed. And I hired a law firm that's a land use attorney. And they told me that I can make it kind of a dual covenant where I can keep it as a rental if I want, or I could actually sell it. And when I was like, well, how do I get the value? How do I get the price? Like, how much can I get? Right? And they said typically 1/3. Well, that was sort of hogwash. They have those back-end numbers and their formulas with the city. And it turns out that you do an appraisal and you try to get the highest price possible in appraisal from a third party. You submit it to the city. They come up with a valuation, and then they come up with an affordable index. So even if it was valued at $1 million, they can still chop it down a lot because they want to bring it to a number that has an affordable index to the. And so 190,000 was the number that they came up with. And
that's just for the affordable unit.
Just for the affordable unit. So if I want to sell it, but again, I can keep it, and in 50 years. Maybe the children can inherit it and they can.
But they do the same thing on rent, right? They'll go through and reduce the rent.
And the thing is, what's interesting, here's a nuance, it's really unique. I can actually sell this to you, that house. I can sell the house to you for $800,000. But here's the thing. You can't rent it for more than $800 and something a year. And then I think every year they change the index, so maybe it's like a 3% escalator or a 2% from that. So that's kind of interesting.
But I'll get you one quick thing, though. We have a client who's an FHA buyer who found an affordable unit in El Segundo, new construction, and it was administered through the city. The city of El Segundo, she had to submit her application. She submitted her applications. There were 3 units in the project. There were 500 other applications on those 3 units. So it's one thing about, if you're looking to live in an affordable unit, our client probably wouldn't qualify because she's actually someone that makes good money, but she's self-employed, so she's claiming less money. Chances are when the city goes through and looks at her application, they're probably going to find someone who's more low cost. But huge demand when you do have those units for people looking to buy them. Go ahead.
Yes, I enjoyed listening. I started my real estate career in the city of Los Angeles. And what I've come to observe with the city of Los Angeles, I love your story about the hoops you had to go through with the city of Los Angeles. They now have given a monopoly on the trash pickup that you're aware of, where trash fees have gone up 300 to 400%. They also have business improvement districts where the city is trying to get more money. I call it extort more money out of you, along with the trash. And the business improvement districts. They also have city fees to do business in the city. And with the business improvement districts, they're raising your property taxes, right? And so what I see, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but the city of Los Angeles is trying to extort as much out of developers, as much out of property owners as they possibly can, and they're coming up with new ideas on how to do that. And I want to know, and I hope you do well in your San Pedro project, but I want to know, is there really opportunities? Because you guys have jumped through hoops, and if you've ever been to city council meetings, which you probably have, you see what's going on. I'd like to hear your comments on that.
All right, so I'm going to repeat the question for both the audio and for people who didn't hear it. So basically, LA County is extorting developers. So, with extortion as your headwind that you're up against, what do you see some of the metrics on your San Pedro property and some of the hurdles that you have?
Well, I think it's LA City specifically. Right. It's really hammering down on fees. And I talked earlier about the linkage fee. I mean, it's literally linkage and there's something called a FIBI fee, which is a Parks and Recreation fee. Those two fees are like double the cost of trying to build anything in the city of LA. Your question was, is there still opportunity?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think there is. I think property value, when you buy a property as a developer, you just have to make sure that there's enough margin left in it. And I think property values are going to have to go down to accommodate the linkage fee. I mean, if today a developer expects to receive $1 million for a 4-unit property, he's going to have to expect less going forward. So I think land prices are going to have to adjust. Where you have like a tear down or something that's really just the value of the land, is going to go down some to accommodate that a little bit. But it doesn't make any sense to me that these linkage fees. I think it's a really backwards way of trying to raise money for affordable housing. I think they said they're going to expect 1,500 units to be built per year based on the linkage fee, and I would be willing to bet there's going to be a lot less than 1,500 units built by developers because of the fee. Opportunity, though, I think there is. I'm still doing projects. I've recently just we closed on a Silver Lake piece of property yesterday, so we still think there's opportunity there. You just got to be very careful how you work out your pro forma numbers, and I think there's going to be some developers that lose their shirt because of the prices increasing. I think the ADUs is definitely an opportunity, and the fees a lot of those fees do not apply to ADUs, so I think that's definitely an opportunity in LA. There's a lot of different areas of LA where the linkage fee doesn't apply if you're building 2 to 5 units too. So there's some, if you read up about a linkage fee, there's some ways around it.
I also think it's something that you said earlier that I think is interesting for the audience too, is that you said you have a partner. You've got someone that you've partnered up with, who I know is someone who's got an extensive background in building this type of stuff. So you mentioned it's got to be on your pro forma. If you're not sure what some of these fees are, that's a great opportunity to find a partner, because it's all a calculation. The deal pencils as long as you buy it for the right price, but that assumes you've got the expectation on the right expenses on the back end. And if you don't know, grabbing a partner and partnering on a deal is a great way to learn some of those things.
I'd like to specifically address what you talked about. I agree with a lot of what you're saying.
You almost like threw your microphone down when you mentioned the trash can.
No, it's I think there is going to be a change with regards to the trash can. I haven't talked to my wife about this yet, but on our bigger apartments, I think I'm going to refuse to accept trash service and actually let the city sue me, and then I'm going to countersue them, because I think I'll win, because it is a monopoly, and I think it's really easy to win that. We'll talk about that later, honey. What I've done with some of the projects and what he mentioned on the linkage fee. So I've been building a lot of smaller apartments in Boyle Heights. I love Boyle Heights. I think it's just a great neighborhood. It's got a lot of upside, and all this transportation is just filled with like subways and like rapid transit buses and great like commercial zoned areas. So I really am super big on Boyle Heights. So we've been building these 6-unit projects, right? On one street we did 30 of them. like across 5 properties, and we did them all in like 10 months. We just built the hell out of them and just built them quick, right? So what we did is, the way we designed it is that they're all separate, like duplex, 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 duplex. And what that allowed us to do is allow us to have avoid a lot of the handicap parking requirements. It also allowed us to avoid, guess what? Because all the units are separate, it's residential zoning still, it's a residential buildings. It's not commercial building code. Every person has their own trash can. Now, it's not very nice on the street, but I don't have to pay for that tenant's trash. I don't have to pay for it, and it's all separately metered. And most of the places that I built, I have artificial grass. I have, I made it really pretty, and I'm not paying for almost any maintenance every month regarding utilities. Everybody's separately, metered and on every utility, and even the trash. And so I was very, very thankful that those units are like that. But the other buildings that are much larger, I'm going to have to face trash. I'm not in any business improvement districts. There isn't a whole lot of them in LA, but they are there. There's a guy named Yuval in the Arts District. He sued the business improvement district, and he won. And he set a case law precedence about exactly what they did. They were extorting the businesses. Now, what's interesting is that if you're a renter, or even if you're a homeowner in an area, you don't have to pay the business improvement district. But if you're a landlord of a commercial property, you are required to pay these fees and people's salaries that are inefficiently working, and cleanup people that have a terrible contract. So there's a lot of things, and you just have to, if you want to go into that, do your underwriting, find out what those expenses are, put an operational budget that's going to possibly have some contingencies on there to go, hey, if they increase the cost by 30% for this line item, I'm still going to be okay. And if not, just don't do the deal.
You mentioned the fact that the smallest stuff is residential instead of commercial. Let's talk about the smallest a little bit. Because
what's your name, sir? David? David had a question?
Do you have a question?
Well, I guess the elephant in the politicians' room, rent control. It's coming. They want it to happen statewide.
Correct.
What do you guys have in commercial and all this looking development, how that's going to impact you guys developing too?
Well, we talked about Constable Hawkins in particular, the time about repealing it, which basically, why don't you talk about, Andrew, you want to talk about that, or Nate?
I can start real fast. What's going to happen is, if you're, one of the biggest issues I think is going to affect developers and people building brand new construction. It's going to affect the consumers as well. Even if someone can get rent control for units that are built after 1978, which is what they're trying to appeal in the city of Los Angeles, they're going to have a maximum rent they can charge, right? And then if people leave, the cities like West Hollywood, for example, has a rule that you can only raise the rent a certain percentage, regardless of if you got rid of the tenant. And so if the new tenant has kind of a limit as well, and so they're trying to bring that back so the cities across California could bring those kinds of laws in place. What's going to be very, very hurtful is that it's going to create less housing stock for our children. That's exactly what's going to happen. Rents are going to go up dramatically because there's less inventory, less apartments being built, because I can't take that 4-unit. We're on that site, it's zoned for 20 units, where that 4-unit is a zone. The city wanted it that way. Everyone wanted it to be zoned that way. That 4-unit now, you can't get rid of those people the same way. Now, will it completely prevent it? No, but it'll make it a lot more difficult, and I think that the cost will have a major impact.
I'll just use an example of a recent project that I was on where we did have a 4-unit, actually, where it was under the Ellis Act or under the rent control, and we wanted to develop the land into 9 small lot homes. So we had to go through this process called the Ellis Act with the LA Housing Authority, and you apply, there's some bits and forms, and you have to talk to the tenants, and they have to sign off, and essentially, well, they don't necessarily have to sign off, but you you have to pay them considerable money to relocate them. So in our case, because all units either had an elderly person or children, it was about $20,000 per unit we had to pay them to relocate. So that was, that's a high cost to develop a 40-unit property. So that's kind of the reality. Now, if they implement this new statewide measure or even citywide that puts all properties in rent control, I think this is going to make it much harder to develop. I think it's going to really slow down the creation of housing and more units.
We actually talked about it. Really, rent control was kind of hard. We didn't look at that as an opportunity. We looked at it as the opposite. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. One thing that I will point out, just because you're all voters, right? Everyone votes. There's a measure coming out in the ballot in California in November. Who here knows what Prop 13 is? Right, with Prop 13 allows you to basically keep your property tax at a very limited growth, very similar to what rent control is meant to do, is to control that. Well, a lot of times people are afraid to sell their property because if you sell your property, you lose that property tax basis, especially if you've owned the property for years. So they passed a prop called Prop 60, which said as long as if you're over the age of 55 and you move within the same county, then you can transfer your property tax basis one time. Okay, so that currently exists right now. And then there's another couple of, there's like 5 or 6 counties around the state that also allow you to transfer your property tax basis. So for example, if you owned a property in LA County and you wanted to go buy a smaller property in Orange County, you can do that and transfer your property tax basis. So one of the things that the California Association of Realtors is actually, we've got enough signed petitions where it's going to be on the ballot in November, is we want to take that Prop 60 measure and make that statewide. So anywhere you want to go, if you want to sell your house in Manhattan Beach and then go retire and buy something in Santa Cruz, you can do that. And the theory being is someone who maybe wants to sell a property in Torrance, right? Maybe that house is only worth $800,000, but then go buy a $400,000 place in Palm Springs. It'll allow you to downsize and keep your property tax basis from whenever you bought it. And hopefully that house in Torrance now becomes a unit that becomes available that person wouldn't sell because they didn't want to lose their property tax basis. So that bill, you'll start to see some things probably over the summer before the election period. But that's another way that, what I like that as, it's not really the state that's saying, hey, this is something we want to do. This is consumers saying, hey, we think this is important and this is one way to create housing. So anyway, side note, just want to let you know that. Yeah.
Isn't it also true that the homeowner can also pass that down to like a child, like a couple generations, like 1 or 2 generations or something like that? You
could actually pass it up too. It doesn't have to go down, but you could pass it if you have a property and you want to pass that property on to a family member. Usually it's a child or a grandchild. You can also one time pass your property tax. Actually, I think it's more. You can do it. I'm not sure about that actually, but you can pass.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I think that you can definitely pass it, and whatever your property tax basis is, you can pass it on to a family member. So yeah, that will exist. That currently exists right now in the state of California.
You can transfer title to a child.
Transfer title,
maintaining the existing tax basis.
If you file the right form. So it's not an automatic just because you transfer title. There is another prop that you have to
But that already exists, right?
That exists right now, yeah. Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about, let's kind of end up, we've got maybe about 10 minutes left here. Let's kind of end on talking about small lots. Both of you are active small lot project developers. One of the things, Andrew, that you just talked about was the fact that this is residential, not commercial. And I think one of the things that when I explain small lots to people, they want to know, like, how is it? Is it a condo? How is it a condo association? So talk about how the small lots are different than a condo or a townhome association, specifically related to the HOA as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been familiar. Who's here familiar with PUDs? So a small lot subdivision is not all that different. And basically, you can build an apartment typically on the site. So let's just say there's a site you build.
So a PUD is a planned urban development,
yeah,
right?
Which is what that acronym. And a lot of those there's almost no lot, and they're individual lots. They're really small lots, but this is basically similar to that. So what? Let's just say you have a site where you can build a 10-unit apartment, right? On that same site, you can put, if you can fit it, right? You might be able to put 10 single-family homes. Most people with these small lot subdivisions in the city of Los Angeles, they go 3 stories. And the typical configuration is 3 stories, 2-car garage at the bottom, and there's a kind of a smaller bedroom, possibly a bathroom on the first floor. Second floor will be a living room, and then the third floor will be another 2 bedrooms. And then the 4th floor, which isn't really a floor, it's a rooftop deck. That's kind of the typical configuration for a small lot subdivision in Los Angeles. Each property, it's on its own separate parcel, and it's on its own separate foundation, and a lot of times they're anywhere between 6 and 8 inches apart from each other. And there's an air gap, and that air gap is protected with some kind of waterproofing. And it doesn't have a homeowners association. It typically has something called a maintenance agreement. And there's a bunch of covenants that allow people access over other people's properties, easements over other people's properties as they're driving down driveways. And then that maintenance association is typically there just to pay for the maintenance of, if they have a sub pump or they have some landscaping or possibly even the driveway getting damaged, things like that. And what it's great for in the city of Los Angeles, they passed this in 2004. Is that what it was? No, 2007. Yeah, 2007. They passed a law to allow you to create these small lots, and I think you can have a lot. Is it small as 600 square feet, or I forgot the exact amount. It's
18 feet wide. That much.
Yeah. And so you have these smaller lots that are there. And what happened is this was it was called the condo alternative. People used to call it the condo alternative because at that time, in order for people to get insurance, they were paying it's like $20,000 just for them to have something called wrap insurance, which gives you the protection of defect liability. Okay, when you're building projects. So these small subdivisions, we're talking about thousands of dollars in insurance each unit now. Not very much, and it's a lower risk. And when the lawyers come at you have a warranty of 10 years, you're number 9, you can't sue in the same way you can sue in a condo association.
You mean the homeowners?
The homeowners
in the small lots, because they're not considered one group of people. They're 10 separate individuals.
Well, the risk is to the developer, right? For 10 years, according to the California law, you're liable as a developer for certain liabilities. You don't have to repair their leaky faucet necessarily for 10 years, but if the bathtub falls through the ceiling 9.5 years after you built it, they potentially could sue you for it as the builder. And so there's a distinct difference between condos and small lot subdivisions in that there's a lot of lawyers out there that are pretty predatory, and they'll just reach out to all the HOAs when they know that the construction is about 9 years old to say, hey, let's all go sue the developer and get everything fixed that that's not working anymore, or repair anything that you think needs to be repaired. So it's very common. In small lot subdivisions, there's a lot less risk of that because there's no actual HOA organization. So it would require each of the homeowners to actually sign on to this group lawsuit. So that's one difference, and it is less costly to buy insurance. As a developer, it's quite costly for insurance. I think a recent project I paid about $60,000 in insurance to build 9 small lot homes, and it could probably be double that for an apartment or a condo building. Yeah.
What kind of zoning is needed? I know you just can't go in and look at any kind of zoning for this. So what kind of zoning has to be in place right now to be able to take a piece of land and subdivide it that way?
Yeah, I can take that. So, we're talking about the city of LA because that's where small lots are allowed. There's a few other cities that are doing it. I know Costa Mesa is another city that allows small lot subdivision development. I think there's some other cities considering it. maybe others that also offer it. But in City of LA, there's the zoning of City of LA is pretty complex, actually. But there's a key kind of code which is like R3, R2, which are kind of standard, R4. What you want to look for a small lot subdivision is typically not R2, because R2 says you can only have 2 properties on the entire parcel. So even if you subdivided it, they're still going to say you can only have 2 units. So R2 is actually not a good zone for small lots, though you might think it would be. And really the ideal one is RD 1.5, which means there's a bunch of RD and then a number after it, which means that you can build, the 1.5 stands for 1,500 square feet. So 1 unit per 1,500 square feet of land. So they have RD 1.5, RD2, RD3, RD4, I think up to 6, I think. So RD 1.5 is kind of the sweet spot for small lot subdivisions, and there's a lot of properties out there in LA City RD 1.5. R3 is sort of the next level of density above RD 1.5. That could also work too, pretty well. But you could also build a fairly high. You could build more units as an apartment building. So R3 is 1 unit per every 800 square feet of land. So a lot of times it probably makes more sense to build an apartment building on that kind of land versus a small lot. But it kind of depends, depends on what people are buying homes for in that neighborhood. So in LA City, those would be sort of the 2 I would look for.
And Andrew, I know part of the art of this thing is not just buying a piece of property and subdividing, it's trying to gather multiple parcels and then subdivide it. Talk about the process of, trying to link together a few parcels before you subdivide them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So everybody in this room probably knows that whenever you buy a property, the first acquisition you make really has to be super substantial so that you bought the land really, really well. You have a nice profit. Just that property you buy, something works there, right? To just buy that if you have to buy the next one next door to make it work, that's a terrible idea, a terrible investment. And so sometimes what's happened, and I never thought of myself as somebody that would be assembling lots. I never thought of myself like that. But I'd get 2 lots that were a really good deal, and then I'd talk to the neighbor next door. And typically I'd have somebody else talk to the neighbor because somehow I'm not the best at talking to the neighbors and getting the best price. So I usually get, I know where my strengths are and where my weaknesses. So I get somebody to go talk to them, and they don't feel like I'm ripping them off or something like that, and we work out a price. And by the time you're in the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th one, you can pay a lot more for those properties. And so now, because it's a lot more scale of being able to build them out. And so with the small lot subdivisions, what's nice is that you can actually turn these into fee simple parcels. And if you buy the land right, even if something really bad happens, like in the economy, and you build in the right area, you can still get great rents for them. Doesn't mean you have to sell them. And if you can underwrite your deals and they pencil and you're cash flowing, or at least you're sort of breaking even through a tough spot, I like to underwrite my deals like that just to make sure. So
you underwrite it multiple ways. This is what it would be if we sold it. If something happens, we have to rent it. Then both are positive returns.
Exactly, and and what's one of the things that we talked about earlier. Small subdivision construction is called typically Type 5 construction. What you see in most houses being built, it's really simple construction. It's not that expensive to build. That depends on your finish level, right? And your finishes that you're putting in. But the construction type is really straightforward. It doesn't require cranes. It doesn't require complex concrete unless that's your style of design. That's what you want. Typically a concrete pad and you made your garage. Most people put a little bit of metal in there because they're not very wide garages. Either a hardy frame or something called a mum frame, which is 3 pieces of steel that go across it. It's not too expensive. And so the construction type is not too expensive for these small lot subdivisions. But once you start creating lots of openings in them and lots of high-end design, they can get expensive,
Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have I know it's maybe a hard question, but a price range when you say not too expensive versus expensive for finished construction?
Well, like a lot of people talk about high-end homes and they're paying, let's just say $500 a square foot. $350 a square foot. I mean, from the footings up, you can find a good contractor in the city of Los Angeles for under $200 a square foot to build you a really high quality product. And then the more scale you have, you can get better and better pricing. So it's not the most expensive product to build versus, for example, you build an apartment. Now, an apartment typically is going to require you to have, a podium, which means a big concrete structure with a concrete deck on top. That gets really expensive because now all of a sudden you have commercial everything, and you don't have fire systems, and it just gets really expensive. So this type of construction for small lots is really straightforward. And
a big factor to look for, though, is how much site work will be needed for the site. There's a lot of listings out there for raw land that are in hillsides, and those can be exponentially more expensive. So just something to be cautious. So we were talking $200 a square foot, which is probably around what I would have thrown out as well as an idea. It's just a flat lot from foundation upwards, maybe $200 a square foot. But as soon as you throw in a hillside with some, grading, shoring, retaining walls, they can easily get quite a lot more expensive. So that's something that I've kind of had to learn the hard way. You get into a contract and, hey, what a deal! And you talk to a civil engineer and you get the bad news. So.
Right. Yeah. Are you guys aware of a program in LA, and I've heard about it, but I don't know much about it, where you build all low-income housing? There are apartment buildings you put up, and I guess it's Section 8 or something. I don't exactly know, but
it's a specialty for sure. There's builders that are building 100% affordable projects, a lot in LA, and typically done in moderate to low-income neighborhoods, typically. And it's a whole different economics for those type of projects. Those are all based on the tax incentive that you could earn from building that building. It's a completely losing proposition at first until you take into account all that there's tax credits for 10 years. So typically the developer or the owner has to hold it for those 10 years, and they accumulate the benefit, which ends up, I think the returns are pretty good from what I hear. There's people that specialize in it. That's definitely not me, but I've heard a little bit about it. I'm kind of more curious to learn more because it's kind of one of those things where you can build in neighborhoods maybe that don't make. Lower income neighborhoods typically don't make sense to develop in. Just generally speaking, when you're talking about trying to sell the homes or rent them, it's really tough because construction cost is so high. You can pay $0 for a lot in some cases and still not make money in a lower income neighborhood. But if you're doing 100% affordable, it could make sense. And so there's a whole specialty group area about affordable, 100% affordable construction.
Do you guys? I couldn't tell from the way you're talking. Do you guys typically sell what you build, or do you hold on to it?
I typically sell everything that I develop.
Yeah, we used to sell almost everything, and at this point, other than the small lot subdivisions, we're trying to keep the majority of probably closer to 90%. But it's taken this many projects to get to that point. Yeah. And I think that's everybody's goal, is to try to create cash flow, to create long-term cash flow with appreciation and a low tax basis.
All right, well, based on time, we're going to wrap everything up. First of all, thank you guys for coming out tonight. Let's get a round of applause for these two guys.